Good afternoon, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. Thought I'd talk a little bit more about that essay on economic theory written by Cantillon, if I said that right. Anyway, this essay on economic theory, was written back in the 1700s, and it's amazing. The more I read, the more I see how prevalent the thoughts were, like the deep-rooted thoughts inside of that essay, and how they relate to what's going on today. We did the first chapter, we talked about wealth. In the second chapter, the author is talking about human society. And now, you got to think, this is the 1700s when he wrote this, so things were a lot different back then. He talks about kings and princes and, taking over lands and stuff like that. Things that you don't typically hear about today. But still, the idea about what happens with the land, I thought was still pretty interesting, because the way the chapter is described is that human societies are based on a distribution of property rights, and that this distribution of property rights is necessarily unequal, and that it's ultimately up to the property owner to decide what it is that they want to do with that property. And now I got to thinking about the chapter after I read it, because the way he basically describes it is that all property is going to end up in the hands of just a few. It will be like a necessary event that takes place. And I think about that as like, it's not necessarily a necessary, like governments have to make it happen. It's a necessary, like they don't have any other choice. It's gonna happen. Like the people don't have any other choice. And so the way he describes it is like, even if you took a particular group of people and you distributed the property up amongst them evenly, like everybody gets exactly the same proportion, give it some time and that property will concentrate into the hands of just a few. And it'll be in just a handful of, people will end up owning the majority of the property. And he says this will happen because basically, if you think about it, as families grow, you may have somebody who has 7 kids, and when he dies to leave his property to his 7 kids, he will not be able to leave a portion as big as he has to each of his kids. So they will end up with less property than their father had. Or you may have somebody who doesn't have any children, and when they pass away, they leave their property to somebody who doesn't need property. And they end up with a concentration or, an excess amount of property. Or you may find people who just don't want their property. They'd rather sell their property off. So you can see there's many ways that this concentration of property could happen. Now, the other thing that I found interesting inside of the chapter is that the author talks about what it is that the property owner is going to do with this property. Now, it's up to them to do whatever they want. And now what he describes inside the essay is like, if the property owner is big into drinking wine, then he'll probably have a lot of vineyards. But the thing about having vineyards is that he's not going to do it himself, and that he would have to have like a crew of people doing it. And in order to have a crew of people doing it, part of his property is going to have to be dedicated for that crew of people. And that some of his property is also going to have to go towards the things that crew of people want. Like, he might be into vineyards and wine and not really care about horses, but the people who are tending the work and doing the work, they may be in the horses, and therefore part of his land would have to go to pastures. If the land was big enough, and you think about it, people would be able to, say, rent land from the property owner to do their own business with. And you could see how the system of taxes would start and be created from this. So it's really interesting to think about the concentration of property and how this is a necessary to get into the hands of a few. Like I said, just kind of naturally occurring. And I think about like right now where I hear about how real estate is concentrating into the hands of just a few. And I think about like, even if you were to attempt to redistribute the wealth, eventually it would end up happening again, no matter what you do. It's a very interesting thought. It was just like, either you're the property owner who is in charge of everything that happens on your property, or you rent your property to be in charge of everything that happens on your property, or you choose not to have any of that and you work for the person who's on that property. And that's ultimately what property rights do. I don't know. Interesting one. A little on the boring side, but I still thought it was kind of unique. Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know.